Good morning, dear colleagues. I suggest that we would start with our event. We are still waiting for a few colleagues to come and to join us here with this event today, but I suggest that since we already entered in a nice, relaxed discussion, that we will also formally start. My name is Milan Jartic. I'm moderating today's event. It is a privilege for me in any case, and I'm glad that it is already for the second time together with our Indonesian colleagues. Well, it's a privilege for me in any case. So since we decided somehow to warm up with a coffee break and then start without a break, we have opening remarks, and I would ask the representatives of co-organizers of this event, IFEMIS, then TETOL and Embassy of Indonesia to Slovenia to open or introduce us to the event. We will listen to introductory remarks of Mr. Zijad Bečirović, Director of International Institute for Middle East and Balkan Studies. Then we will listen also to the introductory words of Deputy Director of TETOL, Dr. Marko, and of course also to the representative of the Embassy of Indonesia to Slovenia, Minister Council Aris Munardar, who will speak on behalf of the Ambassador Puja, who for some other reasons could not attend our today's event. And then we will start with our discussion. So I give the floor to the three introduction speakers. Mr. Bečirović, please.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, allow me to welcome you in the name of International Institute for Middle East and Balkan Studies, IFEMIS, of Ljubljana on today's roundtable conflict resolution from Aceh, Indonesia to Balkan, an exchange of experience and lessons learned which we organized together with Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in Vienna and the company TETOL from Ljubljana. A special welcome and gratitude goes to our guest today from far away Indonesia, the acclaimed and highly respected Ambassador Wiryono. I wish, dear friends, some pleasant stay in our wonderful country. Let me also express our special thanks of the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia, who is represented in this discussion and around the table by Mr. Aris Munardar in the Minister Council. As well to the First Secretary, Dr. Lalu Iqbal, then Dr. Marko Notar, the Deputy Director of TETOL, and Mr. Osman Jalil is very ill now in hospital. Greetings also go to Mr. Jelko Kacin, Member of European Parliament and Vice President European Parliament Delegation for Southeast Europe and reporter of European Parliament for Serbia, and the moderator of the seminar, Dr. Milan Jazbec, acclaimed member of the International Institute IFEMIS and Slovenian new ambassador to Turkey. Welcome and greetings to High Representative of Slovenian Foreign Ministry and Deputy Ambassadors of Croatia, Mr. Ivan Sabolic, and Deputy Ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mr. Krunoslav Vasil, coming in this event. I am glad that today's event is dedicated to exchange and experience of negotiations process from Aceh or Indonesia and Balkan. After all, we need dialogue and negotiations more than ever. Dialogue and negotiations are not only necessary between nations, religions and civilization, but also family, schools, in the environment in which we live and work. I hope that today's event will be a humble contribution to this dialogue and negotiations. At the end of around the table, we are all invited to Indonesian lunch, which we have prepared for participants of today's events. And we give the floor to Dr. Jazbec, and finally we have special awards to Indonesian embassy company, Mr. Osman Jalil. Please, representative of Indonesian embassy.
Sam hittat to zile, tako da nekaj posebno, mislim, pa zdaj, da nikom ne malo tako vodek in očitno tudi tale, mislim, davno je to načitan, premišljen, pomošljen.
I give the floor.
Okay, thank you, Director Mr. Zir Bečižić. Now I would ask the representative of company TETO, Deputy Director Dr. Notar, to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the words. I'd like to excuse myself because I stepped in just in the right last minute, and I'm going to read some sentences. Your Excellencies, Ambassador, distinguished guest, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our General Manager, Mr. Blaško Šorok, I would like to express my deep honor to address this distinguished auditorium today. In the first place, I would like to use the words of our Mayor of Ljubljana. Welcome in the most beautiful city in the world, Ljubljana, of course. Today's international roundtable entitled Conflict Resolution from Indonesia to Balkan is also a great opportunity for our company, Thermal Power Plant Ljubljana, to express once again many thanks to government and people of Indonesia also, who allow Slovenian company to export the environmental friendly coal with an extremely low sulfur level to Ljubljana, to Slovenia indeed. From the point of today's planned discussion, of course, the security of coal supply from Indonesia is one of our major concerns. Therefore, the peace in the region of Southeast Asia and all efforts Indonesia experienced in the past resolving internal conflicts are crucial for our company and Ljubljana also. Let me say at the very end that I'm very grateful that such distinguished names decided to become involved in this meeting, and I'm also trying to encourage you to be productive, to produce new ideas, and I wish that this meeting will be successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Notar, and thanks also to your company for co-organizing this event and for accepting this. And last but not least, of course, the representative of Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia to Slovenia, Minister Chancellor, Mr. Aris Mundanare. Please, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, friends, distinguished guests, good morning to all of you. Let me first convey the apologies of Ambassador, Indonesian Ambassador to Slovenia, for being unable to attend this distinguished forum due to an invitation extended by the President of Austria on short notice. On his behalf, I would like to welcome you all to this roundtable discussion. I would also like to express our gratitude and appreciations to the FIMES for jointly organizing this event, to Mr. Blaško Šorok of the TETO Ljubljana for his strong support for our efforts to advance bilateral relations between Indonesia and Slovenia, to distinguished speakers, Ambassador Riono Sastrohandoyo, Mr. Jerko Kaci, a distinguished member of European Parliament, Mr. Ivan Saboli, and Mr. Vasil Krasmaka for their willingness to share their views and broad experience on the topics of our discussions, and to our friends, Ambassador Dr. Milan Jastek, for accepting our invitations to be the moderator in these discussions. As friends, Ambassador, we are very happy to learn that you just been appointed as the new Slovenian ambassador to Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Lebanon. You deserve the challenging post, and we congratulate you for this appointment. It would be a sin for me if I fail to take this opportunity to also thank to all participants. I'm aware that the big challenge for everyone to turn their attention to such serious discussions, as this is in the midst of warm summer holidays we are now enjoying. Excellencies, friends, distinguished guests, despite the geographical distance between Slovenia and Indonesia, there are many similarities in the regional dimensions in which our two countries are situated. In the past, our countries have both witnessed conflicts in their regions, but they did not just witness those conflicts, they also contributed to mediating and resolving them. Now that our two countries are bound by the same democratic values, they have become even more determined to promote conflict resolutions through peaceful means. Having said that, I believe that our two countries have many perspectives, experiences, and lessons learned that they can share. I hope that this roundtable will be a good venue for such an exchange. I strongly believe that apart from many things that Indonesia can share to others from its own experience in conflict resolutions, there is also a great deal more that it can learn from Slovenia and the Balkan region. This belief is indeed the main reason behind the decision to organize this discussion in the format of a roundtable instead of a seminar. In this format, we expect a more in-depth and interactive discussions so that we will be able not only to share our views, but also to listen to those each other. Finally, I wish you fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Munadar, dear colleague, for this your introduction, which actually was already introduction to the discussion. I mean, very contentful and substantial. With this, you have made my life and role here easier. Let us then now turn to this second part of today's roundtable discussion. Let me just give a few information or repeat some of them. As a moderator, it's my duty to do this. So we have as a topic conflict resolution in two different parts of the world. We are both familiar with our own, and we know something about the others. I think it will be a good starting point to present, to elaborate, and to discuss it. We have two main guests or keynote speakers, one from Indonesia and one from Slovenia. As we know from Indonesia, distinguished Ambassador Riono, former Ambassador of Indonesia to Vienna, Paris, and to Canberra, also former Chief of Negotiation for the government of Indonesia in negotiations with the Aceh Freedom Movement, and former Director General for Political Affairs. So we would hardly get a person who would know more and then be more involved and also prepared to contemplate the experiences as such. And on the Slovene side, we have a distinguished member of the European Parliament, Mr. Jelko Kacin. Mr. Jelko Kacin has been, or he was at the beginning when Slovenia was formed, roughly speaking 20 years ago. He was a Minister of Information, then he was one-term Minister of Defense, then he served in the Slovene Parliament as a President, or as the Chairman of the Foreign Policy Committee, and now he serves second term in the European Parliament, and he is, among others, also a rapporteur for Serbia, knows Western Balkans issues very well, so I'm sure we can all look forward to these two keynote speeches, let's say about 20-25 minutes each. Then we will have comments from our colleagues from Croatian and Bosnian embassy here. We have Mr. Ivan Sabulic, Deputy Chief of Mission of the Croatian embassy. We are waiting for our colleague from the Bosnian embassy. We will hear brief remarks from their side, and then we will engage in a, let's say, discussion, conversation, and then at the end, let's say, roughly speaking, about 12:30, I would ask both keynote speakers to comment, and with their comments wrap up the discussion. As we have agreed, we will not make any formal conclusions, but the discussion as such will offer a lot of conclusions, lessons learned to all of us. Just a few outlines for the discussion. As you can see from the prepared note or memo, we would try to focus on 5 aspects as a kind of skeleton of the discussion. Firstly, experiences in different types of conflict resolutions in Balkans and Indonesia, then the role of state and societies in resolving the conflicts, best practices in conflict resolution, typical and common difficulties, obstacles and lessons learned. So this is a kind of skeleton, and of course please feel free to engage in the discussion after the keynote speeches and remarks. Please free to contribute, to intervene, and of course the drinks are over there, and please just free to help yourself whenever you need to. So then it is my pleasure to introduce the first keynote speaker, Ambassador Yono. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Before I start, may I know how much time you give me?
20-25 minutes, yeah?
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm watching my watch now. Let me begin by expressing my happiness and pleasure to be here in Ljubljana. For some reasons, I was of course in Vienna, and I informed my good colleague, younger colleague and wiser colleague, Ambassador Puja, that I was coming to Vienna. And then he suggested that I participate in the discussion here in Ljubljana. And I have very good reasons to be saying yes to that. Because I've never been to here, to Ljubljana. And secondly, well, as a retired ambassador, you always take the opportunity to visit other countries. I will share the explanation by Mr. Bizirovic that discussion of the issue of conflict resolution is extremely important. It is a necessity, as you said. Why? Because the alternative is very bad. It's costly, and also, prolonged conflict can only produce suffering, human suffering. Now, before we start our discussion, I had our own small exchange of views, and our two regions have similar problems and also similar ways of dealing with conflicts. Southeast Asia in the 50s and 60s used to be called as the Balkan of Southeast Asia. We have a lot of disputes, a lot of problems. We have both interstate conflicts and intrastate conflicts. Now, I think what I'd like to do now is to kind of talk about the experiences of Southeast Asia, and including Indonesia, and dealing with the situation. So I'd like to talk about both the ASEAN Regional Forum, and also about our experiences in dealing with the conflict and resolving it by negotiation in Aceh. And then we can also, in the question and answer period, have another discussion. Now, let me start by discussing, the idea of understanding the process of conflict resolution. Because cooperation between Europe and Asia on collecting and organizing a body of of knowledge that leads to the understanding of this process would enable us to resolve our conflicts better. Now, first, the ASEAN Regional Forum. The ASEAN Regional Forum was, the idea was to promote security cooperation among powers whose activities and interests impact on the Asia-Pacific region. Second, on Aceh, we like to discuss how a third party could help. Because you see, the former Minister of Defense of Israel, General Moshe Dayan, says that if you want peace, you talk to the enemy, not your friends. But enemies don't talk, and impossible to talk. So there is always a need for a third party to facilitate this negotiation or the discussion. Now, the RAF has conceptualized a three-stage process in any conflict situation. First, you need to have confidence-building measures to promote good feeling and so on, so they are confident to negotiate. And then you go to the second stage, which we call as preventive diplomacy. But we know that conflict situation usually already happened. You cannot prevent it. It is already there usually. But I think the situation in Europe, I'll talk about that later, is very encouraging. So the third stage after preventive diplomacy is conflict resolution itself. So those are the three stages that we envisage. But if we compare our strategy with that of Europe, we see that Europe has developed more institutionalized systems. Because ARF, unlike the OSCE in Europe, is not organized to carry out a direct role of preventive diplomacy. And what is the reason for that? Well, because it is basically a multilateral forum, and it's an open diplomacy forum, while facilitating or negotiating conflict resolution, you must start with confidentiality, without, open, because we start with private diplomacy, not public diplomacy. That is the difficulty number one. Now, if we compare to the European situation, we see here that you have what is called High Commissioner on National Minorities, and he is tasked to provide early warning, meaning that before a conflict happens, he has to warn the governments that there is a problem. And secondly, also he is empowered to have early action in the earliest possible stage in regard to tension involving national minority issues. But in the judgment of the High Commissioner, have a potential to become a conflict within the OSCE area. Also in Europe, you have what is known as Conflict Prevention Center. The Conflict Prevention Center provides direct support to the OSCE field operation. And the center also do liaison function between the OSCE field operation and its main negotiating bodies. Now, what is ARF? ARF is basically just a forum of dialogue, a talk shop. It doesn't actually deal directly. And since 1994, when it was started, we actually have not moved beyond confidence building. So ASEAN's major achievement is avoidance of conflict, but resolution of interstate conflicts, we have not been able to move very far. So that is the fact. Why is it so? Well, basically because we are still very sovereignty-oriented nations. We are young nations, and so we are very jealous of our sovereignty. And also, part of that, corollary to that, is the idea of non-intervention. We don't like to be intervened. But this is, of course, something that we have to move, and therefore we now have a charter, but the charter is far from being very strong. It is still consensus-based and so on. Now, part of the problem of preventive diplomacy, at least at the initial phase, is that it needs to be carried out in confidentiality, private diplomacy. In a multilateral forum, it is difficult to operate confidentially because it becomes open and then the media report it and so on. So on the regional level, it is my view that ASEAN has a lot to learn from Europe. ARF must learn more about thinking about High Commissioner position and conflict resolution center and so on, which we don't have. Now, I think I'd like to move after saying that on Aceh, because it's an intra-state conflict situation. And what are the reasons of the problem of Aceh? Why is it that we have the GAM, the Aceh, Free Aceh movement? Well, when I was returning home from Australia as ambassador, I was asked by my government to be the negotiator. But actually I didn't know very much about Aceh. We are a young nation, I'm Japanese, and Aceh is the most northern part of our provinces, and I haven't even been there. So I tried to know what is the issue. Well, basically Aceh is a very rich, one of the richest provinces of Indonesia. There are 4 provinces in Indonesia that is rich. One is Aceh, second is the province of Riau Islands, and third is East Kalimantan, and then Papua, West Papua. Now, what is the contribution of Aceh to our national economy? It is like 13% of our GDP. So it's quite substantial, you see. Now, then I try to know how much do they get back in return from the central government, because under Suharto we have a centralized system. And I found out from the planning agency that they are getting back only 0.1% or something. So it's very little. And Acehnese who would be visiting Jakarta, you would be confused. Because in Jakarta, if you go through the main avenues of Jakarta, the Jalan Tamrin, you see a lot of overbridges. But to the Acehnese, it's a big shock. There are no rivers, but many bridges. In Aceh, there are many rivers and no bridges. So the sense of injustice is there. That is basically the source of grievances. And that's why now the government has passed a law giving 75% of the revenue coming from natural resources to the province of Aceh, and 25% for the settlement. But it doesn't resolve the problem automatically. So that is basically the issue. Now, when I was negotiator, it was beginning in 2002. There has already been some preliminary discussion led by the later he became foreign minister, Hassan Wirayuda. At that time he was ambassador to Geneva. Now, the basic thing is that we need a third party to facilitate the discussions, the negotiation. But Indonesia was just out from the East Timor problem, which was very traumatic for the whole nation. And basically, the perception of the people is that President Habibie has made a mistake in having a referendum. So while internationally President Habibie was appreciated, nationally he was blamed. And the United Nations doesn't have a good standing in the eyes of the people. So when we have the problem of Aceh, for people like myself, it would be logical to say that we must seek the assistance of the United Nations. But it was politically impossible. So what we did was, because we have a president coming from the NGO field, President Wahid, he looked for an NGO. And there was one in Geneva called the Henri Dunant Center of Humanitarian Dialogue. And when President Wahid was in Geneva, he was offered by the Henri Dunant Center the role for Henri Dunant to play as a facilitator of the negotiation. President Wahid has no experience in government, but he is a civil society man. So he said right there, said, yes, I'd like to have you, but without consulting proper government agencies and ministers and so on. It is good and it's bad. It's good because then it becomes a commitment that has to be followed up. And then he instructed the ambassador there, Hassan Wirayuda, to be the negotiator. However, then Hassan Wirayuda became minister, and I was just returning from Australia, and I was asked to be the negotiator for the government. So, basically, to make the long story short, it is that then we started to negotiate, and we achieved an agreement, which was called the COHA, Cessation of Hostilities Agreement, COHA. Now, the idea is that we will move to a period of negotiation, but with the understanding that the rebels, the GAM, the Free Aceh movement, would have to accept autonomy as the solution, as a starting point. That was done, but it was rather unfortunate because both on the government side as well as on the rebel side, there were not enough will to implement the agreement. And the military in Indonesia was also adamant, because this is because of the existence of a mindset in Indonesia. As you know, Indonesia was proclaimed in 1945, but we had rebellions after rebellions, from the regions. It's very much like conflict, many conflicts here in the Balkan. And in the past, during the Sukarno time and Suharto time, rebels are understood to be people that have to be crushed. So the crush mentality, the crush mindset is there, and in particular among the military, because the military, they understand only the language of force, hammer. When you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Just that was the situation at that time. But after the reforms, or we call it reformasi in Indonesia, we then have a different atmosphere, the need to negotiate. And that's why negotiation was followed. Now, the important thing is that in 2004, we have a new president, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, who is now serving his second term. And although he is a military man, he believes that the problem should be resolved peacefully. And he is, so to say, a man of peace. Now, but people sometimes theorize, that the will to negotiate is important, and that is a political will. But in my view, political will is not it's not just a matter of will. It is a matter of circumstances. And the most compelling element in 2004 was that we had the tsunami. The tsunami destroyed everything. And under such situation, I think they found themselves like the Japanese after being bombed by the nuclear atomic bomb. Enough is enough. No more fighting. In Europe, after the First World War, Second World War, then you are, people here say all the same thing. Enough is enough. No more wars. So these are the circumstances. Human beings learn the hard way. Well, the history of the world is the history of wars and peace. But Europe, since 1945, I think has been peaceful and becomes a bastion of peace, democracy, rule of law, and all the good things. Although, of course, now we are in a different kind of crisis again, you see. But anyway, we then have another period of negotiations with the government because the COHA broke down and was not implemented. And so by 2005, we started a negotiation again. But this time, we have another facilitator. It is not the Henri Dunant Center, but the outfit chaired by the former president of Finland, Dr. Martti Ahtisaari, which is the CMI, I think. It's, I don't remember but it is Center for Mediation Initiative or something like that. Anyway, the tsunami was the compelling element that forced both sides to negotiate freely. Now let me just, because I think I've spoken quite a lot, just say what are the lessons, the insights. Now, from Indonesia's experience in bringing peace to Aceh, several insights and lessons can be learned, can be gleaned. Number one is that in a peace process involving a sitting government, it matters a great deal that the government has the political will to make peace and must be willing to spend precious political capital to make peace. But as I said, political will is not a matter of political will only. It has to be created by certain conditions and circumstances. Now, I was also the negotiator between the government of Philippines and the rebels in the Moro National Liberation Front in 1991. It was a decisive year because after the Cold War was over, somehow the government of Saudi Arabia and the government of Libya were not anymore willing to assist Mr. Miswari, the liberal leader in southern Mindanao. So Mr. Miswari was forced to go to the negotiating table. Secondly, President Ramos was recently elected at that time, and he wants to use his fresh mandate as president to resolve one of their most serious problems. You see. And then Indonesia at that time was in a kind of difficult situation because of our behavior that creates a lot of criticism in terms of human rights violation and East Timor and whatnot. So we need to kind of try to beautify our own situation by trying to help resolve both the Cambodia problem and the Southern Moro problem. So these circumstances kind of are in place and generate the opportunity for negotiation. So this is, I think, a very important element in my view, to be realistic, to understand So the first lesson is that peace process involving a sitting government, it matters a great deal that that government has the political will. But that political will is basically created by the circumstances. It's like, why is the G8 extended to become G20? because the G8 feels that they are not fully representative. They need more. They are compelled, not because of their generosity, you see. So this is, I think, a very important lesson that one must understand in trying to resolve a problem, a conflict. You see. Now, secondly, the second lesson in my view is that both sides must be sufficiently motivated. Because unless they are serious, negotiation will not go very far. And there are, of course, cases in which negotiation never leads. The Israeli-Palestine situation, for example, that's very difficult. There are many other problems. In fact, when I was involved in the Moro National Liberation Front and Government of Philippines negotiation, in the OIC, there are like 54 cases of conflict, and none of them are resolved. So the one in Southern Philippines solution is the only one that has some good developments. So again, as I said, there is a need for a third-party role to facilitate, because as Moshe Dayan once said, if you want to make peace, you don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies. But enemies don't talk, so you need a third party. So the third party role is extremely. Now, so that is the third lesson, third party. Now, the fourth element, the lesson that I must also say, is that solution is never final. Because even you have a final agreement, you still have a lot of problems that come into existence after you sign the agreement. And the agreement itself is never perfect. So you have to understand this. And the implementation, signing an agreement is one thing. Implementing the agreement is something else. Now let me tell you our situation in Aceh now. It is basically, we have an agreement, we have implemented the agreement, but does it resolve the problem completely? Not yet. Why? Because the agreement was perceived by the parliament as not sufficiently protecting the national interests of Indonesia, and in particular the unity of the nation, the integrity of the nation. So how do they perceive it? They perceive it, the agreement, not as the final solution, but only a temporary solution, a kind of halfway house. They accepted autonomy, but they never say that they have abandoned the idea of independence. So there are a lot of people within Indonesia who think that this is just it's a tactic, not a fight. And especially among the military. But fortunately, the military have been in Indonesia depoliticized, so they are not able to play much role, you see. But privately, they still can do something. So that's why if you read in the papers once in a while that some people are being kidnapped or killed and so on, it's that. Now the challenge is to maintain it at the manageable level. As long as it is not that big, And then at the same time, the economic and social development must take place. Now, this is the difficulty of a post-conflict problem. Because the Acehnese have been fighting since the 50s. So they don't have people who have the expertise of running the government, even though they have a lot of money. And one of the difficulties is that the central government people, because of the decentralized system, the autonomy system, they are simply saying, now you are autonomy, you have the money, it's your problem. But they don't have the expertise, so they ask the central government for expertise, but they don't communicate very well. So this is one of the problems. Now, after the tsunami, there is a lot of assistance, international assistance from all over the world. And there's a lot of money too, and also expertise. But even if you want to help, it's not always easy. Because the Acehnese are getting help from the government, from the NGOs, from foreign governments, and foreign governments channel their money in different ways. And for example, the size of the house. Maybe the house built by the Americans is a little bit bigger than the house built by the Australians. So it creates a problem among the Chinese themselves, and he doesn't want to receive unless I'm given the same house. So there are little details like this that is not easy to manage. You see. So the fourth lesson is that solution is never final. You need to have post-implementation policies to. Now the fifth lesson, according to me, is that there is no such thing as a perfect agreement. Now, because agreement is a compromise, and it doesn't satisfy everybody. There are always people who don't like it. Now, in the case of Aceh, it is fortunate that mostly people have resigned to the fact that they have reached a compromise in which both will have to make sacrifices and take some risk while implementing the compromise under difficult circumstances. So that is basically what keeps the situation in Aceh basically good, but I think I still have to cross my fingers because the difficulties are still there. Now, what is the last lesson that in terms of negotiation and so on? First, there is no hard and fast rules. Every problem is different. You have a different problem here, we have, but there are basic lessons that we can learn. As I said, the 5 lessons from negotiation. I was not really expert on negotiation. I was just like any other diplomat, but I was charged with the responsibility, and then I learned about it. But now I think there are many institutions that discuss this scientifically, the art of or the science of negotiation and so on. In Harvard, in different universities in the United States and in the West, and here in Europe also. So the techniques and approach that are to be used in resolving conflict will have to depend on the general situation, the disposition and perception of the parties in dispute or conflict, the external or international environment that conflict or dispute, and the capabilities and credibility of the entity carrying out the preventive diplomacy. The Henri Dunant Center was less successful than the CMI because the CMI has President Marty Ahtisaari and also the European Union backing up, with funding and so on. So it has more capability and credibility. So let me conclude, by saying that on the ARF OECE comparison, I think basically we need to learn from Europe. And on the issue of preventive diplomacy or conflict resolution in general, I think it makes advisable for countries with conflict situation like in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and also part of Europe here, former East Europe and so on, that we have a regular exchange of views like this one, and exchange experience about their respective regions' experiences, because the art of negotiating or facilitating negotiation and so on is, it's a complex art. And I think there is a need, if we want to resolve the conflict situation in Europe and in this region and also in Southeast Asia. I was just having a private conversation with our moderator, and I was saying to him that when I was ambassador to Australia, one of the questions they asked from the media was that, Mr. Ambassador, Indonesia is in such a complicated situation. Are you going to be the way Yugoslavia go? I mean, disintegrate. Well, I said, of course, I understand the questions because what they see in Indonesia is also, in danger of going there. But I didn't have the answer at that time, but I have a personal answer. And I said that Indonesia is a nation that is still growing into a nation, becoming more solid, more modern, more developed. And we are in that mode. And to describe that, to illustrate that, I said, I look at my own experience. I said that, and when I was 25 years old, my mother said, you have to think about marriage. And you are Javanese, and because my mother, of course, is from the old generation, and she would say that you must preferably marry a Javanese, because that would be the ideal thing for her. Well, I don't believe in that, but anyway, I married a Japanese finally. Now, when I was older, then I have my own daughter who is 20 or 23, and my daughter started to have dates with boys. And one evening I asked my daughter, with whom did you go out? And she said, oh, so-and-so. No, what I mean is he Javanese or Sumatran or... Her answer was indicative of our situation. She said, what do I care? He's Indonesian. So we become more Indonesian. While here, I think you are returning to your own individual identities. So I said to the journalist that I don't think Indonesia will break up. Well, it has not break up so far. Thank you very much for sharing my views, and I'm willing to also entertain questions or challenges, and so that we can learn from each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this excellent keynote speech. It was for us, I guess, a thrilling exercise to listen to it and enjoy it. You also helped to refresh some of my knowledge about that issue, so thank you very much once again. In the meantime, also Director General of TETOL, Mr. Koshok, joined us. So welcome to the discussion, and thanks for your preparedness to be co-organizers of this event. We'll continue with the second keynote speaker from Slovenian side, Mr. Jelko Kacin. Jelko, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Miran. Your Excellencies, it is a great honor and a challenge for me to say something about European experience. But let me start by saying that we Europeans, we were able to start two global wars. The first war was the First World War, and it was somehow provoked, or the excuse for the beginning of the world was invented in Sarajevo, in Austro-Hungarian monarchy, long time ago, almost 100 years ago. And on Sunday, we will have the biggest funeral in Europe on July 11th in Srebrenica. There will be a janaza, as the Muslims say, when they will burn, where they will bury 775 remainings of civil victims of genocide in Srebrenica. 774 of them are Muslim, and one of them is a Catholic. So we are again in a Balkan. So we need to start by saying what the Balkan is. And in a political term, Balkan means a complete confusion, a lot of history. Everything what can create mass is a Balkan. But at the same time, when we talk about Balkan, I don't want to provoke anybody, but let me share with you my experience. Miran said that I was the chairman of Foreign Affairs Committee in the National Parliament of Slovenia, and in that time I was also very much involved in our negotiations in the accession process towards and to the EU. And of course, there were many occasions when speakers were coming from the Western Balkan, and I was in a quite comfortable position, because whenever we started conversation, the first speaker was always coming from Croatia, protesting that Croatia is not part of Western Balkan, that is a part of Central Europe. So my country is lying a little bit more west, comparing with Croatia, so there was never need to intervene. But now, since we are in European Union, I always start my intervention underlying that I am coming from Western Balkan. Western Balkan is now an illustration of Balkan, because Eastern Balkan is stable, boring, and safe, may I say so, because Romania and Bulgaria are already in EU and NATO as well. Turkey, whatever anybody thinks about Turkey, Turkey is a prosperous country, is a prosperous economy, it's a well-doing economy. It is also a candidate country that is opening and closing chapters on its way towards EU. So when we talk about Western Balkan, we simply need to talk about former Yugoslavia plus Albania. When somebody from outside would like to speak about Western Balkan, they are talking about former Yugoslavia without Slovenia plus Albania, but I myself as a Slovenian, I need to say it is Slovenia and all the rest of the former Yugoslav republics, including former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, that is not allowed to use their constitutional name, and Albania. This is what we need to solve. So, what is a European approach, and why did we fail? The European approach was always a preventive one. After the end of First World War, Second World War, 5 years after that, Europeans and Americans, let's talk about Americans, Brits, and France. They created Western Germany. They sum up, they integrated 3 occupied zones and created new state. This state was integrated in a community of steel and coal at that time. Integration was invented as a preventive approach, not to allow repeating the mistakes from the past. So, on the basis of that, we forced France and Germany to cooperate. We made them an ENG. We forced them to control each other. It was happened before I was born. I was not involved. Yugoslavia was not involved. But now we are full members of EU and NATO as well. That's why when we talk about history, I need to talk about common history. So we Europeans forced them to cooperate. And that was a process going on. And there was always a problem which is common all around the globe. The problem can be illustrated by a very simple way: a lack of leadership. You need a leader who lead the nation, who create the public opinion, and who do not follow the public opinion. This is the main key for every solution. You need a brave, a wise, experienced, capable, operative politicians. I'm liberal, but I will now talk about conservatives. In Europe, we were quite lucky to have German Chancellor Kohl, who was big enough, physically and politically, and who was wise enough and high enough to see far away in the future. His political strategic objective was to reunify Germany. And this is mission impossible without cooperation with Soviet Union of that time. That's why I would like to remind you that whenever there were difficulties in Russia, Kohl was on the spot, the first one to express solidarity. In any case, he was always there. He was always playing a role of a bridge. He was always playing a role of facilitator, of communicator. He was a solicitor, an advocate of Soviet Union at that time. Despite there was a divided Berlin and Eastern Germany just across the border. And at the end of the day, he made it. He reunified. He reunified Germany. This was a so-called hidden enlargement of European Union and NATO. When Eastern Germany became a part of EU, it was evident that on the basis of that fact, all the other Eastern countries need to have the same chances. And the process started. So this is it. On that basis, when Eastern Germany became a part of NATO, it became evident that whoever wants to become a part of NATO can join it. So this was the process. Integration. At the same time, there were other processes. Disintegration. Disintegration of Soviet Union, disintegration of Czechoslovakia, and disintegration of Yugoslavia. I don't want to spend too much of time for Russia, but I believe that democratization is a process that is evident there. We can complain about democracy there, but it is much better than it was. Definitely. When we talk about Czechoslovakia, there was an agreement about that. But what was the problem with Yugoslavia? Yugoslavia was a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-faith society. It was a federation. We Slovenes were part of that Yugoslavia. You were talking about the figures, about the share of Aceh. When we talk about Slovenia, our share in population of Yugoslavia was just 8%. Our contribution in GDP of Yugoslavia was 25%. Our contribution in export of Yugoslavia was 1/3. And then we left this Yugoslavia. Why was it happening? Because, and now I need to start lecturing. On Monday, there was an attempt to assassinate a member of National Parliament of Kosovo. His name is Petar Miletic. He was shot twice. He is now in hospital in Mitrovica. And we just yesterday in European Parliament expressed our solidarity with him. He is one of us. Attempt of assassination on member of any national parliament anywhere around the globe is attack on democracy, is an effort to destabilize the country, to create chaos, and to go back, not to go forward. Kosovo was a problem 25 years ago. When the workers in mine in Trepča started to strike, police intervened there. And it was a very dangerous situation. It was 25 years ago, something like that. At that time, in a Yugoslav federation, we agreed that we will prevent negative developments. And at that time, all the republics were forced to contribute their police forces to go there. That unit was once, on the basis of rotation, commanded by police commander coming from every republic. When for the very first time Slovene commander appeared there, we discovered that the police forces are not there to prevent but to provoke. And we withdraw our police forces from Kosovo at that time because we didn't want to participate in that game. What was the game? This is the main point to understand. There was a study made inside of Communist Party of Yugoslavia, and the outcome of that study was saying that Albanians might become majority inside of Serbia in a relatively short period of time. let's say, today. That's why in Serbia they decided that they are going to prevent that development. That's why Milosevic decided to come on power. He pushed aside Stambolic, president of Central Committee at that time, who was later assassinated by criminals, and Milosevic, who was behind it in Serbia. And he decided, he created a strategic plan to prevent that development. The basis of that plan was to reduce the number of Albanians inside of Yugoslavia and to reduce the number of Albanians inside of Serbia. To achieve that objective, he decided that he will do some changes. As soon as Albanian in Kosovo was 18 years old, he got a passport, free. Normally, when you were 18 years old, you got a passport. And they were trying to persuade people to go away, to reduce the number of Albanians, because demographic trend was really booming at that time. And that was not enough. Then he decided that he will increase number of Serbs in Serbia to decrease the relative numbers of Albanians. That's why he created two para-states, one in Croatia called Republika Srpska Krajina and the other in Bosnia called Republika Srpska. So his strategic plan was to merge Republika Srpska and Republika Srpska Krajina with Serbia to create bigger Serbia inside of Yugoslavia. And to achieve that objective, he was looking for an excuse. And the excuse should be Slovenia. And we didn't understand that. Due to our contribution in the economy, we were opposing to that. We were quite loyal. But that at the end of the day, they started with two kind of provocations. The first one was a so-called, we called it yogurt revolution. So demonstrators were coming from all Yugoslavia to the different republics, demonstrating and assisting to the local population to change the leadership. What they were asking for were just sandwiches and yogurt. That's why we called it yogurt revolution. And Slovenia was the first and the only republic who said, no, you are not allowed to enter on the territory of Slovenia. It was the first such a case when our police forces at that time announced that they are going to block internal border inside of Yugoslavia, and they came to Zagreb and then they turned back. That was one provocation, a very clear message. And the second one, even stronger, was when they decided in Belgrade to impose economic sanctions on products coming from Slovenia on Serbian market. At that time, we were quite shocked and we discovered that we lost domestic market. On the basis of that, everything changed here. And when we organized a referenda asking, are you in favor of creating an independent state? It was 90% of people who participated, and it was 90% of them who said yes. These are enormous high figures, you know how difficult it is to bring people on referenda and how difficult it is to achieve such an objective. Any analysis bring us to the conclusion that even non-Slovenes in Slovenia were voting in favor of independence of Slovenia to exclude the territory, population and economy of Slovenia from the mess that was appearing in the rest of Yugoslavia at that time. So we made it. But where is the difference? The difference is that our war was just 10 days long, because our strategic objective was not to win, but to stop. Yep. To start negotiations. To start negotiations around the round table. And after 10 days, we achieved that. They believe that we are not going to resist. They believe that they are going to smash us. we were quite effective, especially in creating public opinion here in Europe and in Europe. So after that we started negotiations, and we reached the agreement with the Yugoslav National Army to withdraw army troops from Slovenia. So it is not true that Slovenia was politically recognized at the beginning of 1992, when it was first done by Iceland, and then the next one was Vatican, and then the rest of the European Union at that time. No. The first institution that recognized independence of Slovenia was Yugoslav National Army, that withdrew troops from Slovenia. And on the basis of that, we were able to create much better atmosphere in the European Union and the other states. To be honest, when we were involved in war, it was our assessment that we need to survive for 3 months, because after that the new war will escalate, and we believe that this war might escalate in Bosnia, and we were wrong. It escalated in Croatia. So our assessment at that time was wrong. And then, of course, I need to say something about the 90s. In Western Balkan, Slovenia was excluded. The wars escalated one by one. I need to tell you that in 1995, in February, I was participating in NATO maneuvers in Norway called Strong Resolve. At that time, everything was ready for NATO intervention in Bosnia. All the messages were sent there to Serbia that NATO is going to intervene. But that was not enough. Announcement was not enough. It was not achievable without military campaign. That's why Croatia started their liberation offensive at the beginning of August 95. That was, after that, continued to the territory of Bosnia. That brought at the end of the day Dayton Agreement. And we imposed peace in Bosnia. We imposed, when I'm saying we, not we Slovenes, but Europeans, international community, we imposed war in Croatia. In the meantime, in July 95, Srebrenica was happened. That's why I'm coming back on a national background of these conflicts. When Ratko Mladic, commander of Serbian army of Republika Srpska, appeared in Srebrenica, he said, I will say now in his language and then I will translate, to je poklon srpstvu i došlo je vreme da mi uzvratimo Turcima sve ono što su oni, da se osvetimo Turcima za sve ono što su oni počinili nama. So this is a gift to Serbian nation, liberation of Srebrenica. But it is also a moment to revenge to Turks for everything what they did centuries ago to us. Bosniaks who were killed are not Turks. They are Slavic population. And in Yugoslavia, in south of Balkan, south of Europe, there is a difference between these nations basically on religious affiliation. So Croats are Catholics, Serbs are Orthodox, and Bosniaks are local administrators from the period of Ottoman Empire. Because Ottoman Empire was never directly running the occupied territories. They always gave a chance to local administrators to run it. So basically, these three nations who live together in Croatia, Bosnia and Serbia, they perfectly communicate among each other. There are differences, grammatic differences in languages, but they are artificial, may I say so, because of historical reasons and because of faith affiliation. But when they are not able to communicate, they have reasons why they cannot communicate among themselves. And of course, it is not the end of the story. In 1999, it was again the same situation when a new genocide was appearing in Kosovo. And at that time, there was a strategic decision to intervene again against Milosevic, who was committing or launching these campaigns before. He, in the meantime, upgraded himself to the peacemaker, and then in the case of Kosovo, he was, how can I say, reshuffled or reshaped again in a problem that were really a threat, not just for the peace and stability, but for much larger genocide that might appear in Kosovo. At that time, there was a strong resolve, it was a strong response. Germany was included in, but there was no ground operations, everything was done from the air. At the end, NATO came into Kosovo. Just a small detail. You know who were the first foreign troops in Kosovo? Russians, who were opposing to intervention. And then they decided to send paratroopers to Pristina on the airport to be first on the spot before that. So now I want to conclude to make some general remarks. We in Europe, we invented a system of preventive approach that is called integration. Integration is possible by the enlargement. That's why European Union was enlarged over the territory of Greece long time ago, after the coup d'etat, when the colonels were provoking and destabilizing the country and the neighborhood, threatening the confrontation with Turkey. By the way, Turkish intervention in Cyprus was a consequence of provocations coming from Greece and their intention to merge Cyprus and Greece together. So one is a cause and something is a consequence. So the Turkish intervention in Cyprus is a consequence. And when we talk about the enlargement process, this enlargement process, going through the accession process, makes everything possible. Mission impossible becomes mission needed, a must, mission possible. There would be no chance for Hungary to become member of NATO without resolving the problems with Romania. And Romania would not be able to become member of NATO without giving a minority rights to Hungarians in Romania. Today, when you talk with politicians from Slovakia and Hungary and asking what is going to happen after the elections that already happened, can it go worse? They would say, no, it cannot go worse because we are at the bottom. There can be no worse scenario. But these two countries are already in EU and NATO. And inside of EU and NATO, we have mechanisms to prevent these negative developments. That's why the enlargement process, the accession process of Western Balkan countries is the only solution to, how can I say, demilitarize them, to take them away all the ammunition. Because at the end of the day, when all these countries, all these economies will be part of EU, we will be in the same package. We will be in the same composition. There will be no borders. No, there will be borders, but there will be no police control because Schengen means... This is the alarm that I'm already talking 20 minutes. I will conclude. So, the best way to prevent negative developments is to speed up the process of enlargement of European Union. That is possible only in a case that accession countries are changing themselves and progressing in accession process. That's why the accession of Croatia is in our interest. But we were having very cold relations until Croatia became member of NATO, because after that Prime Minister Sanader left his post. Why was that happen? I don't want to answer on this occasion. But comparison which I'm going to say now is not a provocation. I don't want to compare anybody with North or South Korea. But you cannot make any progress between Pyongyang and Seoul without sunshine policy. What we desperately need is a positive approach. Somebody needs to break it. Somebody needs to come with future orientation, with positive energy, with positive accession. We did it. And after Sanader left, the positive response came from Croatia. And impossible become possible. Today in Dubrovnik, our two prime ministers will announce that they have somehow solved one of the last problems that we were not able to solve. It's called Nova Ljubljanska Banka and our accession on Croat market, and to find a solution for the assets that are blocked there for decades. So we need a positive approach, we need a sunshine policy. One of the preconditions for the enlargement is to improve neighborhood relations. And now I'm coming back to Kosovo, where everything started in the case of Yugoslavia. The problem with Kosovo is that Belgrade believes that Kosovo is not their neighborhood, because they still pretend that the neighboring state is Albania, not a Kosovo. But in Tirana, they know that they don't have a common border with Serbia, because in between there is Kosovo. And the border guards in Albania, watching across, they don't see any Serbian officer, Serbian administrator, nobody from Serbia. They're just Kosovars. So they are pretending and somehow living in an artificial world. And if we want to create a realistic future, we need to come to the ground. We need to confront with reality. So Serbia is having enormous problems because they are not grounded yet. This is the basis of the problem. On Sunday, there will be that funeral. We will commemorate 15 years since the genocide. This genocide was twice proved by the final decision of courts. One is ICG, International Court for Yugoslavia, International Court of Justice, and the other one is the International Court for the crimes committed on the territory of former Yugoslavia. And despite that, a leader of Republika Srpska, which is part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, still does not recognize it. He will not appear there. I believe that on Sunday there will be a prime minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but because he is Serb, he will not speak. There will be 5 prime ministers. No, there will be 5 presidents and 7 prime ministers, including our president, including the Belgian prime minister in office, Leterme. There will be Erdogan coming from Turkey. What is very important, to come to participate in a commemorating genocide. You know their story with the genocide. When Erdogan is appearing here, it's just the first chapter. The other chapters will follow. So Turkey is really doing enormous job for the stabilization and making mission impossible in the Western Balkans possible again. That's why I will conclude that without participation, active participation of Gül and Erdogan from Turkey, that were organizing Istanbul summit, without Istanbul resolution, without arrival of Erdogan on Sunday in Srebrenica, these would not be able. But when the Turkish Prime Minister is there, Jadranka Kosor will come, the Serbian President will come, Montenegrin President will be there. So all the neighboring states will be represented on the highest possible level. And we are again investing in better relations with neighbors. This is the only solution. So we don't talk, as you were saying, about enemies. No. We need to talk about neighbors. And without, again, sunshine policy, you cannot achieve anything. Only sunshine policy creates precondition for positive approach to invest in improving of neighborhood relations, and this is the only way to make accession and, as a consequence, enlargement of EU possible. So this is European approach: enlargement, growing of European Union, and making evident that we are very different but united in our differences. We are multicultural, multi-ethnic society. I'm one of 7 Slovenian members of European Parliament, and Slovene language is an official language of European Union. We have 22 official languages for the time being. Very soon we'll get one more, Croat language. After that, I believe, or at the same time, we might get Iceland language as an official language. Because Iceland, despite they didn't start negotiations yet, they already closed 22 chapters. They, of course, have 2 bilateral challenges that they need to overcome. One is Netherlands assets, and the second one are British assets due to the scandals and collapse of their banking system. But this cannot prevent the beginning of negotiations. What we are again saying, let's create a sunshine policy. Let's find a solution. Let's make mission impossible possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jirko, for this very in-depth, illustrative and useful keynote speech. With this, we have somehow entered deep into the discussion already and into the core of our event, and we are moving forward for some reflections, contributions from everybody from here. Perhaps I would ask our Croatian colleague to reflect a little bit or to present some of their experiences, including the non-permanent membership in the Security Council, what was one of the most important achievements, speaking from the neighborhood, to say so. But before that, allow me to relax a little bit our atmosphere with one joke from former Yugoslavia, or at least aphorism, which shows to a certain extent why that country dissolved. In the late 80s, there was a joke that in former Yugoslavia we had North Korea in south and South Korea north. So illustrating the huge discrepancies, economical, political, cultural, and so on, which were growing in that country, and which were one of the driving forces for creation of that conditions in which that country initiated. So, Mr. Sabolic, would you then comment a little bit from your point of view, 5-10 minutes, something like that, as you wish. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me first that I would thanks Indonesian Embassy for organizing this roundtable about very important topic. Croatia in the last 2 decades has had experience transition from communist regime and experience building the new state and institutions. We had many similarly in the process of conflicts and negotiation process. I would thank Mr. Kacin for good brief about process in former Yugoslavia and what is specific characteristic Croatian negotiation process? For me, is often improvisation in that process. Croatia in the beginning 19 started building institutions, diplomacy and army. In the same time, we had a brutal aggression from Serbia and Montenegro. In the same time, other republic, former Yugoslavia, have had similar experience, Slovenia and Bosnia and Herzegovina especially. War in Bosnia and Herzegovina, strong influence to negotiations process between Croatia and Serbia and Montenegro. Fact is that in the period of negotiation process, Serbia hasn't a political will for building peace. We have experienced total destruction of Vukovar and many cities in Croatia. We had experienced genocide in Srebrenica. We had experienced Sarajevo and many cities in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And fact is that after seriously Operation Croatia Army, in Operation Oluja at 95, and after that in common military Operation Croatia and Bosnian armies, Serbia was ready for seriously negotiation about peace agreement. Peace Dayton agreement was important for stop the war and building peace. 3 years later, in Croatia has finished peace mission, UN peace mission in Slavonia, and after that, peace mission in Prevlak. We know that Peace Dayton agreement is not perfect, especially for building institutions and democratization state, but it was crucial for stop the war.
Okay, thank you very much for your brief contribution and reflection to this, what we have on today's agenda. Unfortunately, our colleague from Bosnia has not arrived. Yeah. Okay. Perhaps if he comes, he will join the discussion. Otherwise, we will just continue with this. So if you then allow, I would step in with my small contribution, not on behalf of Bosnian colleague, but because there is a few minutes time since he has not appeared. I would try, not as a moderator, but just as a participant here, to present a few of my views about the topic discussed, and I will do this, let's say, from more holistic point of view, knowing that we at the end have a hedonistic part in the lunch in the restaurant. So, looking at the today's topic, so conflict resolution and the management of conflicts, I think that we can point out, or one can point out, two phases which are most important, or let's say critical. First, preventing the conflict. Now, this is, I would say, that critical part before, or in the first part, and then post-conflict rehabilitation or building. I think that these two phases are critical because with the first one, different actors try to stop the conflict, to calm down the conflict, to release tensions, that there will be no major conflict outbroken. If this is the case, then of course we know that after the disaster, after the tsunami, let's say, speaking so with the symbolism, things will have to be built up again. In each cases, I think we have many actors or players which try to do, or try to, in first case, to prevent the conflict, in the second case, try to exercise the post-conflict rehabilitation. We can speak about diplomacy, military, police, NGOs, media, especially international organizations. Judging from the, let's say, generally from the Balkan conflict, and from the fact that Europe is quite institutionalized as far as the presence of multilateral fora is concerned. This is perhaps one of the biggest differences with the Southeastern Asia, where we have, let's say, primarily Asian. In the phase of preventing conflict in the Western Balkans and in former Yugoslavia, we noticed that at least 4 outstanding international organizations took place and tried to do their best: the UN, the EU, the OSCE, and NATO. So, from a theoretical point of view, we can speak about hard security and military security players. Whatever the expectations were in 91, 92, especially when the process of negotiation with the international community in Slovenia and Croatia was at its peak, it proved later on that, basically speaking, on the territory of former Yugoslavia and in the Balkans or the Western Balkans, preventing diplomacy and a conflict solution with peaceful approach failed. It obviously was not, generally speaking, possible to prevent conflict and dissolve conflict with the only peaceful approach with peaceful instruments with preventive diplomacy. As we know from this, what is today history, but also Jelko mentioned also our Croatian colleague, Dayton peace accords were accomplished and reached only with the strong backing of hard security issues of NATO. Without this, it wouldn't have been possible to stop the war and to enter the phase of post-conflict rehabilitation. As you perhaps know or have heard, during the 92 especially, and also later 93, 94, there was a series of peace agreements concluded between, let's say, so Serbian side, who was the aggressor in Bosnia, and EU. But of course, all these peace agreements failed the very moment, even before when the ink on the paper dried. So the combination of diplomatic activities brought some results when it was obviously, strongly, and without any hesitation backed up with a strong military force. This ended the conflict in Bosnia and in the Balkans at the same time, and with this, or major conflict, and with this, the phase of post-conflict rehabilitation started. We can say that 15 years after the Dayton Peace Accord was concluded, it would be in late this autumn, one can say that that intervention brought results, that it started the phase of post-conflict rehabilitation, and at the same time, looking backwards, one can notice that after 7 years or something like that, let's say, the agreement which was concluded to stop the war has converted or transferred itself primarily now to be the obstacle of the post-conflict rehabilitation in that phase when state institutions are built, that they function, they work, and they are somehow bound with the narrow approach which the peace accord offers, and which was at that time the only possible and the best possible to stop the war. So the phase of post-conflict rehabilitation is a long one, is complicated, is very sensitive, and the more actors are involved and are necessary, the more sensitive this process is. We especially see this in Bosnia, where one could analyze and notice a kind of discrepancy between the political elites on one side and then civil society, NGOs, role of media on the other side. I think having this in number 3, 4 here, this is important to bear in mind. As the time when the military conflict was stopped advances, the important part in post-conflict rehabilitation is played by soft actors, soft security actors like media, civil society, NGOs, and so on. And here we come. I try more to repeat or generalize this what we already heard. In the European case, the role of the European integration process. European integration process at least can be understood in from three points of view. It is a frame, it is a very broad frame within which historical grievances, historical hostilities can be left behind, and this integration process as a frame offers maneuver space to go forward, to integrate this what was disintegrated and what was hostile. Secondly, I think that we can understand also the European integration process as a substance. Acquis communautaire, free flow of goods, people, ideas, capital, now also of knowledge. So this brings around a substance which helps to, from one point of view, to unify the institutionalized approach for management of issues, to say so, and from another point of view, it also enables the preservation of differences which unite Europe as such. And thirdly, European integration process could be also understood as a tool which enhances the reforms of the societies along this what in the European history has been proven as positive, useful, and which upgrades and supports the future development of societies. I think perhaps these are some special characteristics of European experiences, having in mind the Balkan experience within the conflict resolution and state building process. I think that it's also good to have in mind this what my colleague on the right side, Ambassador Briono, mentioned, the role of the third party. Generally speaking, and stemming from the Balkan issue or historical lesson, we can speak about the international community as this third party. Of course, the phrase international community means a lot. With this international community, at least as far as the Balkans are concerned, we have in mind various international organizations, which I also already mentioned, and several NGOs, experts, individuals, countries, which all are present still today in various spots in the Western Balkans with different intensity. 3 years ago, we had 5 different representation offices of the EU as such, for example, in Pristina. So when we speak about the support, intervention, help, whatever of the third party, and when we have in mind international community, it's good to have in mind the very heterogeneous structure of this international community, the very possible and also noticeable overlapping of various activities, and the question of efficiency, and of course the question of costs. This adds to the experience of management in the post-conflict rehabilitation. Perhaps, if I just repeat once again, one of the most important lessons learned is to establish the conditions where peace agreement could be or is efficient by strong military backup. We have 2 such experiences in the region, in the Western Balkans. I think it's important to bear in mind when we do a case study here. And perhaps to conclude this, my very brief reflection and contribution to the discussion, I remember when I was serving in Belgrade at the end of the former Yugoslavia, I was a diplomat in the foreign ministry, and once I had a discussion with the Canadian ambassador, James B. Bisset. I was desk officer for Canada for some period of time, and he commented to me once in the, I think it was early 90, he said, compromise seems to be dirty word around. So I think this reflects the history of the Balkan Peninsula, history of foreign interventions, of national hostilities, and I hope, or hopefully, it also shows that this perhaps is the past experience. I think that we can say that the Western Balkans region has, for the first time in its history, now a unique, perhaps the only one, I don't know, chance for peace, progress, and stability. So with this, I will finish my contribution, and of course would now ask if anybody from the audience would add something, some reflections, and then with the, let's say, 20 minutes, we'll give the final floor to our two main speakers. Yeah, okay. Dr. Igbar, yeah. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Gasbeck. I don't think I can provide any new things to share with the expert here, but I just want to pose some question. But first of all, before I come to my question, I want to express my appreciation to Ambassador Wiryono for his comprehensive explanation that even though I'm an Indonesian diplomat, and in fact I am his student in the diplomatic academy, I always find so many things new whenever I talk to him. So it's not exaggerating if I'm saying that he is the intellectual oasis of Indonesian young diplomat. And secondly, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to Mr. Jelko Kacin, sorry if I'm spelling this, for his enlightening explanation. I doubt myself if I can find anybody else who can give me the same level, the same comprehensive explanation on the historical perspective of the issue that you have explained. I have two questions for Mr. Kacin. It's not question, maybe it's just because I want to enrich my knowledge on the issue. First, regarding the, you have said that we really need a positive approach in resolving the problem with the neighbors here in the Balkan. But I remember in 2005, if I'm not wrong, the EU has suggested to use the mediation of Mati Artisari in resolving the outstanding dispute between Slovenia and Croatia at that time. And then it seems to me from my reading that the Slovenian side at that time was a bit reluctant to accept that mediation. I just want to know what was the background of that persistency, whether there is a specific historical background on that issue. And then second, especially because you are the expert in the security, because you used to be the Minister of Defense, so I would like to ask that the Slovenian has decided to run for candidacy for Security Council for the next year, for the next 2 years. And in fact, Indonesia has decided to give its support to Slovenia for this candidacy. My question is, what would be the role that Slovenia has planned to take during its membership in the Security Council with regard to the resolving the outstanding disputes in the Western Balkan? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for the question. So, Jelko, would you go?
Yeah, let me start by saying something that on the basis of negative experience, being unrealistic and unsuccessful under the flag of United Nations in late 90s, we developed different approaches in dealing with conflicts. Let me start by saying that at the beginning of 90s, UN was conducting so-called peacekeeping operations, peacekeepers. But then we discovered that you cannot keep peace when you don't have peace. So we upgraded not just the wording, but the tactics and the substance of operation that is called peacemaking. And after that, even peace enforcing. So it is also a history that we learned something from our unsuccessful efforts to prevent. That's why in Europe we developed preventive approaches. What was happened in case of Kosovo in 1999 was preventive attempt. Preventive. To prevent genocide that would happen in Kosovo after that. So we enriched ourselves. Not just inside of NATO, we are now developing our own capacities inside of European Union as well. You have here a representative of Netherlands Embassy, and there is a moment to say something, because Netherlands will play final of World Cup on Monday. On Sunday, sorry. Sunday. I don't know what is the announcement of Octopus in Germany, who is going to win, but I just want to tell you a very sad story. A few weeks ago, one of High Representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina appeared in my office in Brussels, asking me to assist them in their efforts to commemorate Srebrenica genocide on 11th in South Africa at the beginning of final game. And 2 days ago they were calling me back from the television of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina asking for my opinion. And I didn't want to answer. And they were persistent. And then at the end of the day I said, I'm not going to fly to South Africa. I'm going to fly in Bosnia. Actually, I'm going to Srebrenica. And I believe that genocide has nothing in common with football. And nothing in common with World Championship. But it might happen that somebody, maybe not just a few of them, will on the basis of that develop new accusation for Netherlands that they do not pay enough respect for the victims of Srebrenica, despite that Football Association cannot allow anything like that. It is not a politics. It has nothing in common with football. But a lot of people in Srebrenica and in Bosnia are now missing the facts. And they are publicly announcing that they would like to sue Netherlands being responsible for the genocide. There was no Dutch citizen involved in committing that genocide there. It was the army of Republika Srpska. So if somebody in Bosnia, in this moment, 15 years after this genocide, is not capable to understand that if there is somebody to be accused, is on the side of Republika Srpska, or on the side of their state, not on the side of EU member state, Netherlands, who was the only state at that time, when we still didn't develop the capacities for peacemaking operations, they were, with the best efforts, with all of positive energy, appeared there. If nobody, we will appear, it was the statement of a minister of that time, because I was a minister of defense at that time in Slovenia, and I know how was the situation developing at that time. He and his government was really trying to assist and to prevent genocide, because, I go a little bit back, because General Murillo, who was a peacekeeper there before, created three protected zones, Žepa, Goražde and Srebrenica. And he prevented committing of genocide years before. He, personally, himself, came to Srebrenica and stopped Ratko Mladic and his troops there. And then he was withdrawn, because Mitterrand didn't want to have any problems in relations with Serbia. He, as a general, was withdrawn out of Bosnia to make something possible. And Netherlands was reacting at that time to prevent that development. And Netherlands is now the main target, what is a complete nonsense. I just want to say something about three events that were happening cum si cum sa at the same time. One was genocide in Srebrenica. One was genocide in Rwanda a little bit before. where now we have a strange habit. I was in Rwanda a few times after that, and they have an official policy that nobody can expose herself. I'm not using the expression himself because there's a lack of him. There are more or less women who survived that genocide. So they are Rwandese. Nobody exposed herself or himself as a Tutsi or Hutsi. It is an official policy to promote citizenship and not to identify yourself with your national identity. Because to be Rwandese means that you have a state identity, but not a national identity or a tribe affiliation. So I believe that this is the approach that is not acceptable for us in Europe. As I said at my conclusions, we are united in our diversity. We need to express ourselves in different cultures, what means in different languages. Language and a culture is the basis of identity. Everything else follows that. And the third case of that type is assassination of late Yitzhak Rabin, who was the Prime Minister of Israel, who was also before a successful commander, and he was enjoying a lot of trust among the inhabitants of Israel. That's why they give him a chance to make a peace. And because he was a successful commander, he was the only person at that moment to be able to deliver these expectations. That's why he was not just Prime Minister. He was at the same time a defense minister as well. In one person, these two very difficult and complex portfolios. But he was assassinated to prevent peace enforcement, peace implementation. So this was happening there at the late 80s and till the mid-90s. Pokličem nazaj čez 5 minut. Hvala. Now about your question concerning Ahtisaari. Before we reached the agreement about the arbitration concerning the border between Slovenia and Croatia, there was efforts assisted by European Commission that included Ahtisaari as well. But Ahtisaari was not accepted by Croatia. We didn't have any problems to accept Ahtisaari. Ahtisaari was also a part of a solution in case of Kosovo, because what is now implementing is Ahtisaari plan. New Serbian municipalities on the territory of Kosovo are also part of Ahtisaari plan. On the basis of that, we have had a full trust to him. But then he said, forget it. I can do something if and when two countries are mature enough. At that moment, two countries were not mature enough. At that moment, there was still not positive changes in Croatia. Gentlemen from Croatia can tell you. Everything what was happened after. Please don't quote me outside what I'm going to say. After Sanader announced in Zagreb that he will go to Security Council in New York, and there he will give a lesson to everybody concerning this border dispute. And when he came there, he was not in position to give lesson to anybody. His intention was to go to Washington. And after that, he discovered that there is nobody in Washington that is available to receive him. So the highest official of the United States that received him on that occasion was American ambassador in United Nations, and nobody else. And when he came back, he was, how can I say, he became wise, and he decided to withdraw himself. So when he disappeared, and when she appeared, we created much better atmosphere. That's why I use the expression sunshine policy, and I didn't want to to embarrass anybody by saying that. Only by positive approach you can deliver something. That's why we were also trying to create, together with Prime Minister Jadranka Kosor and our Prime Minister, a summit here in Brdo in the spring of this year, to bring all of the Western Balkan politicians together. And we failed, because Tadic didn't want to appear. Serbia was not ready at that time. And after that, Tadic was not able to attend on inauguration of Croat president. But positive developments in Croatia are creating better preconditions to positive developments in the region. Because Mr. Josipovic, the president of Croatia, is intellectual. He's on a much higher level than Tadic. So when he is lecturing on music and international law, you cannot do that on the basis of populism. So everybody needs to raise the standard of his or her own behavior. And this is an enormous contribution to more rational mood in a Western Balkan. So this is really an important contribution that assisted us very much in creating better chances for the faster positive development in a Western Balkan. That's why I started, and I need to conclude again, this funeral where everybody will attending and not a lot of Western Balkans will speak, they will just be there to pay tribute, will be very important in symbolic sense, especially because it is happening after this Croatia summit today and tomorrow, where there will be another positive announcement. So it means that we are filling this family picture of Western Balkan with positive news. What we are asking all the time from the Brussels institutions, we are asking for positive reports, positive news coming from Western Balkan. You cannot accuse EU institutions, you cannot force them, you cannot question them why they did not do, because we are not joining to the Western Balkan. Applicant countries need to adopt themselves on our standards as we were forced to do it before. And it is basically true that on every occasion, on every new round of enlargement, there are more strict preconditions and conditions for the affiliation and integration. And it is good. We cannot downward the standards, we need to upgrade the standards, because this is the only way. On the basis of financial and economic crisis, we have experienced a few very bad experiences, and that's why I said 2 days ago that I was feeling like sitting in North Korean parliament when we were voting on 5 pieces of legislations concerning the control of finance and banking system. We agreed, and we were almost 700 MEPs sitting on a plenary when we were voting, and 680 and something were in favor to postpone a final voting, to give a chance to the Council and the Commission to prepare everything to implement these 7 pieces. So we will vote again when this trialogue will bring very concrete results, how to implement it in reality, and then we will vote in favor. So we are now so mature that we are aware of the fact that we are in a big trouble and that we need to prove ourselves. And this brings to very common position and, as I said, North Korean outcome of the voting in the European Parliament, what would be completely impossible a few months ago.
Thank you, Mirko, for this elaboration. Since time is coming closer to 1 o'clock, if the watch of Mr. Kacin is okay, and if we can trust that watch, I would suggest that we have final comments from our first keynote speaker, Ambassador Vidiola, and then we wrap up the event. Or
President, I have any questions for Ambassador?
yes, go ahead, yes.
Please ask role of civil society in the Aceh negotiation process.
Okay. Civil society.
Yeah. And you experience with cooperations civil society in Aceh.
Yes. Well, we have to talk about the role of civil society in two different periods. Before the fall of Suharto and after the fall of Suharto. Because before the fall of President Suharto, civil society was, of course, extremely limited, controlled. And the government people at that time usually say that civil societies are agents of foreign power because they are mostly funded by resources from outside the country. But now, civil society role is extremely important. You know, in fact, when President SBY was confronted with the problem of what to do with the process of investigation about corruption, he relies on civil society and asked a lawyer who is outside the government, university professors and so on, to help him, you know, with what recommendation to it. Now, in particular with regard to the process of Aceh, at that time, of course, the government was seen as using or overusing hard power, reliance on the military, and less diplomacy. But the civil society in general was against the military. So there was a kind of confrontational situation between society but the government was kind of understand that the issue cannot be resolved by force because it has been going on for almost 30 years. But in order to move to the negotiating table, the government needs to kind of balance it. Because the popular perception of people in Indonesia with regard to rebellion is that rebellion is rebellion and it should be crushed. You don't talk to rebels. And that was our experience, whether it is the rebellion by the communists in 1948, or by the colonels in the 50s, or all of them, also in 65, when we have another communist attempt to seize power. It's always been crushed. So, in the year 2000, when I was asked to be negotiator, a lot of people criticized me, and they even attacked me on saying, you don't understand Indonesian history. Rebels are to be crushed, period. You don't talk with them. So I operate within this rather difficult circumstances, you see. But finally, slowly, Indonesia is reforming, and the forces of democracy is working. And democracy means talking, discussing peacefully. So finally, what happened was we had a vice president, Kala, who is a decisive man, a decision maker, who take the issue into his own hands and proceeded with the negotiation secretly. 5 negotiations. At the end of the negotiation, they announced the result of the negotiation, facilitated by Mr. Ahtisari. But Parliament is still kind of controlled by the old mindset. And they worry a lot about Indonesia letting Aceh out of the unitary state. So that is their main concern. So what they do is they pass a law called Law on Governing Aceh, which is quite different from the MOU that we signed. Now, that creates a kind of dualism, you know. But somehow it worked. Of course, the rebels, the GAM, complained. And they complained to the EU. But the EU is also in difficulty because EU has facilitated the negotiation and spent a lot of resources to assist, you know, the post-conflict situation. But Indonesia has also become a democracy. So what the EU is saying to the rebels is, you cannot possibly oppose or ask me to complain to the Indonesian government to change the law. Because the law is passed by a democratically elected parliament. That's the dilemma, you see. And there is no solution. So the solution is, well, you let the developments take place somehow, unperfect, not perfect, but somehow up to now the peace hold, and it's maintained. Now let me go to your connected with your questions about after peace is achieved, you know, what to do. You see, the meaning preventive diplomacy is not only to prevent conflict from happening, because most conflicts have already happened, so already in existence. So what you try to do is to reverse the process of peace, and you need different people for different states of the process. If you want to make peace, what you want is first a peacemaker. Basically, well, anybody who can be, you know, a facilitator. And most of the time it's a diplomat. And that's why, well, I didn't know very much about Aceh, but because I was involved in Aceh and southern Mindanao and also in Cambodia, they think that I can also contribute to the. So you go on a peacemaker. But once peace is achieved, agreement is signed, you need peacemakers, peacekeepers. And this is a role to be played by military people in general, because you need to be in the field, you need to decide what kind of arms you have, and you need posts and so on, organization. And I think the Swedes are very good in it. You know. And the United Nations has a United Nations Peacekeeping Operation Department. They know how to do it. But also, funding is a problem. You see, so this is a problem that has to go. Now, at the third stage, when peacemaking is over and peacekeeping is over, then you have to start by peace building. In fact, peace building can go together with the others, because the stomach cannot wait. People have to eat, they have to normalize life, and so on. School has to be open, and so on. So, peace builders require different people again. So these are complex operations and not easy to build. Now let me just, because we have been discussing conflict resolution, conflict prevention and so on, and the result is peace. But what kind of peace? In Asia, I think what we have since the end of the Second World War is what I might call as negative peace. It is peace that is in the sense of absence of war and also avoidance of conflict. But if I compare it with the situation in Europe, since I come here with the idea of learning from Europe, in Europe you have a more positive peace. Because you go into what is called integration. And integration means we are too in the integration process. But our integration is probably still at the level of the first floor, so but you are already in the fifth floor. The integration is much more advanced because you have all kind of funds, to help those who are lagging behind. We don't have that, and that's why on Myanmar it's difficult to move. On different issues, in the area, it's difficult to move because we understand that democracy cannot be discussed in isolation because it is related to other issues. But the idea of sovereignty is still very strong. The idea of non-intervention is still very strong. While here, I think in Europe, you have passed that period, and intervention can be accepted. And in fact, the Commissioner for Minorities is powerful enough to act on his own, a mandate that we should establish. With us, we need to go to a forum first and then discuss. And that's why issues between Malaysia and Indonesia, issues between Thailand and Cambodia, issues between the different members of ASEAN cannot be resolved because if you look at the 10 countries of ASEAN, you see, 2 of them are one-party communist system, Laos and Vietnam. And then you have a military junta in Myanmar. And then you have a one-man rule in Brunei, very rich, fortunately, because Brunei is a country of 350,000 people, and they produce 350,000 barrels of oil a day. So they have 1 barrel per person. It's easy to govern such a country, you see. And then you have Singapore, which is very prosperous. I would call it smart authoritarianism, because they do it right, and so economically they are very advanced. And then we have Thailand, where we have a rather messy situation, because they go to democracy a long time ago, in 1992, but they have a coup d'etat, and then have a democracy again. So Malaysia is a different situation. Malaysia is, they have an internal problem because they have a concept of what they call Ketuanan Melayu, Malay master. So the non-Malay are not considered equal, and they still have to go through national building process. And then you have the Philippines, where there's been a democracy, but for a while it was under Marcos, and they are somewhat messy because each politicians have armed groups. So it's difficult. Indonesia, they're not very old in its democracy, but I think we now look good because basically we are functioning as a democracy. So under that kind of situation, avoidance of conflict is the best achievement. But positive conflict, positive peace, in the sense of having a system that, enable people, countries to cooperate to produce a high degree of prosperity, because this is important. It's not just the avoidance of peace. You also have to improve the economy, the social situation, and so on. So that is basically my comments, my wrap-up comments after discussing this morning. And I think we, of course, need to learn from Europe, but we cannot copy Europe. But we can learn some techniques, policies that we can use in ASEAN. But before we do that, ASEAN needs to be more integrated and also more similar in its system. When every country is a democracy, it's easier. But when we have different systems like that, it's difficult. But Indonesia is now kind of very active. We have the Bali Forum, Freedom Forum, and we also started an institute called Institute for Peace and Democracy, because we believe that peace and democracy are related, and that we need to be promoting both. But I think these are the things that we are still having, confronting in Southeast Asia, in order to integrate more fully, and not by copying Europe, but by also learning from Europe, on certain. So that would be my concluding remarks, and I hope, let me just say in conclusion how grateful I am to have listened to all of you and the developments here in the Balkans, that to me, as an outsider, looks a lot better than a long time ago when this region was much more messy, so to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villona. I understand that with this we have concluded today's program. Thank you very much to all of you. Thanks also to you, Ambassador. We learned a lot from you, so the pleasure was mutual. I understand since there are no official conclusions, it will be much easier for me to wrap up the discussion, to say once again thanks to all of you. I think it was very important that we detected similarities between the two countries, regions, and so on, and that we use them as a point of departure for discussing, dwelling, contemplating, and I think that it is my guess we have learned and reached some good starting points to continue with that form of discussion, and at least it is my sincere hope that this will prove possible in future. So I would just like to add one remark. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but it is understandable that within such a forum there are Chatham House rules, so please do not quote directly what each of us said, but quote as much as possible the content, the substance, and the messages. And before closing, I would just like to express special thanks to our colleague Dr. Lalo Igdal. He has been the driving force, the secret driving force behind this event. So this is a pulse of a professional diplomat, so thanks also to you, and thank you to everybody. And as I was advised, I now, on behalf of the organizers, extend the invitation to join and continue to join at the luncheon, where of course we will continue discussions, so very informal. Thank you very much.